Flashes of gray hulls cut through Caribbean waters as the USS Gerald R. Ford turned south, its flight deck crowded, its escorts in formation. For the first time in modern history, America's most advanced carrier isn't headed toward Europe or the Pacific. It's steaming toward Latin America. The mission: counter cartels, project power, and send a message that Washington's reach now extends deep into the hemisphere's blue. A show of force meant to remind the world who still commands these waters. Before we dive in, hit like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you never miss a deep dive from Naval Brief. On October 24, 2025, the Pentagon confirmed the redeployment of the USS Gerald R. Ford, flagship of Carrier Strike Group 12, from the Mediterranean to the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific. Officials called it part of a trans-regional counter-narcotics surge. Unofficially, it signals something broader, a strategic pivot, an operation that merges military deterrence, political theater, and regional influence in one move. For months, U.S. forces have been intercepting smuggling routes and striking suspected cartel-linked vessels from the Caribbean to the Pacific. What had long been Coast Guard interdiction patrols is now a carrier-backed operation capable of precision strikes and 24-hour surveillance. For the Navy, it's a huge escalation of presence. For Latin America, it's a new chapter in American naval diplomacy, one written in jet noise. The deployment comes amid a surge in maritime smuggling. Semi-subs gliding out of Venezuelan coves, drone-guided go-fast boats weaving through Central American channels, their routes now resembling naval supply lines more than smuggling runs. For a while, the traffickers stayed a step ahead. Then the strikes began, and suddenly, adaptation turned into survival. The shift was sudden and unmistakable. For years, smugglers adapted faster than governments could react. But the Ford arrival changed that rhythm overnight. Behind the official statements sits a deeper motive: pressure. Washington wants to remind regional leaders, especially in Caracas, that U.S. reach hasn't weakened. Deploying the Ford into Southern Command's area of responsibility sends that reminder loud and clear. It also signals to Beijing and Moscow, both of which have been courting Caribbean and South American ports, that America still commands the sea lanes. This is deterrence by demonstration. Not war, not peace, just presence with teeth. But the Ford isn't just presence. It's punctuation, a reminder that every decision on these waters now carries more weight and more risk than ever. The Ford isn't here to chase anyone. It's here to make everyone think twice. It replaces the smaller cutters and frigates that used to patrol these waters. Imagine years of compact patrol boats trying to manage a never-ending swarm of smugglers. Then suddenly the door opens and in walks the heavyweight. The message isn't subtle. This isn't a maritime police beat anymore. It's a security operation backed by a floating city. You can bet that made waves in every coastal cartel compound. For years, their biggest concern was radar pings and Coast Guard helicopters. Now they're glancing up at the clouds, wondering if the gray silhouette overhead is just weather or something with afterburners. That's deterrence, the expensive kind. Officials maintain that the mission isn't combat, but the optics speak louder. The Ford sails with destroyers and cruisers capable of launching tomahawks across a continent. Their radar coverage stretches from the Yucatan to the Orinoco. Washington calls it regional security. Caracas calls it provocation. Either way, it's unmistakable presence. The announcement landed hard across Latin America. Venezuela's government condemned the deployment, calling it an act of provocation. Cuba labeled it imperialist theater. Colombia's leadership offered guarded support, balancing domestic politics with security cooperation. And in smaller coastal nations, Trinidad, Suriname, Belize, leaders welcomed the surge, seeing it as protection against rising transshipment violence. In Washington, reaction split. Supporters said the deployment proves the U.S. can project force anywhere, not only in the Pacific. Critics argued that using a supercarrier for counter-narcotics is overkill, an expensive symbol chasing small boats. But inside the Pentagon, sources say the calculus was simple: Howard Dieter's risk. It's a reminder that deterrence isn't theory. It's visible, tangible, and sailing just offshore of those who test the limits. And in this administration, deterrence is the message. Satellite imagery shows the Ford's escorts, the destroyers USS Thomas Hudner, USS Bulkley and the cruiser USS Leyte Gulf, forming a moving shield through the Caribbean. Maritime patrol aircraft have joined the carrier's operations in the Caribbean, extending its eyes far beyond the horizon. Intelligence sharing between the Navy, DEA, and regional partners has intensified under a classified framework nicknamed Blue Current. While officials say the missions focus on surveillance and interdiction, multiple defense analysts believe strike packages are preloaded for contingency use should a hostile vessel be confirmed as cartel-linked or hostile flagged. In short, the Ford isn't just showing the flag, it's stepping up what a counter-narcotics fleet looks like. That move carries its own risks. Allies from NATO to the Gulf have expressed quiet concern about coverage gaps, but the White House insists the deployment is temporary and justified by strategic necessity. Domestically, the decision feeds into the administration's hardline messaging: bring drugs, face force. Supporters frame it as action after decades of drift. Opponents see a blurred line between law enforcement and warfare. Whichever view wins, the U.S. Navy now finds itself enforcing policy at the intersection of crime, politics, and deterrence. Beyond the headlines, the Ford's movement sends several strategic signals. 1. Reassertion of hemispheric dominance. The U.S. is reminding the world that its near seas are still its sphere of influence. 2. Flexibility of global force. By shifting from the Mediterranean to the Caribbean in weeks, the Navy proves it can redirect mass power anywhere on the map. 3. Testing readiness. After years of technical delays and criticism, this deployment puts the Ford under real-world, sustained operational pressure. 4. Proxy pressure. Rivals like China and Russia, both cultivating port access in the region, now face an American flight deck within range. Each of those points folds into the same narrative: control the seas, shape the politics. In a region long treated as quiet waters, the Ford's shadow now redraws boundaries that politics alone could never hold. Whether this operation becomes the new normal or a temporary flex, it redraws the map. The Caribbean is no longer a quiet backwater of naval charts. It's a live theater of strategy, crime, and power projection. At its center sails a ship meant to remind everyone, from smugglers to states, that the ocean still listens when the U.S. Navy speaks. The USS Gerald R, Ford steaming into the Caribbean, marks more than a movement of ships. It marks a redefinition of how the U.S. projects authority. From the Strait of Hormuz to the South China Sea, America's carriers have long enforced order abroad. Now, that same presence is circling closer to home. Whether it's about drugs, deterrence, or demonstration, the message is unmistakable. America's most advanced carrier isn't looking toward distant wars. It's guarding its own front yard. This is Naval Brief. If you're all hands on deck with maritime conflict, naval power, and defense analysis, subscribe and stay mission ready for the next briefing.